Good evening and welcome. Thank you for joining us for our final fall lecture of the 2024 Society of Architectural Historians St. Louis Chapter, St. Louis Public Library, Steedman Architectural Library Lecture Series. On behalf of the St. Louis Public Library, Steedman Architectural Library, we are pleased to continue our collaboration with the Society of Architectural Historians St. Louis Chapter and host this lecture series. Before we begin, we ask that you all please mute your devices. Should you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A section on the YouTube if you have them. After our talk tonight, we will pose your questions to John Guenther. And now I'd like to introduce Bob Moore, past park historian, Gateway Arch National Park, author and educator, who serves as vice president of the Society of Architectural Historians St. Louis Chapter. He will introduce our speaker for this evening's talk. Bob?
Thank you, Trent, for your welcome and for hosting this talk. And please know how appreciative we are to the St. Louis Public Library and the Steedman Architectural Library for our continued collaboration for this lecture series. Tonight it's my privilege to introduce our friend and colleague, John Guenther, a fellow of the AIA, a lead AP. John has produced a distinguished body of architecture that contributes significantly to the built environment, with projects ranging from the adaptive reuse of historic landmarks to new projects that fit comfortably into their physical, environmental, social, and historic context. His work has received over 50 national, regional, and local awards from the American Institute of Architects and a diverse array of professional organizations, civic groups, and publications. In 2010, John was elevated to fellowship in the American Institute of Architects for notable contributions to the advancement of the profession of architecture and design. And as you know, he also serves as the president of the Society of Architectural Historians St. Louis Chapter. As an architect, John seeks to contribute through his designs an architecture which serves and ennobles our lives, works with the environment, and also enhances our world. As a historian, he recognizes that we stand on the shoulders of those who have gone before us. So tonight, John's going to talk about the forgotten architectural legacy of Harvey Ellis. And John has been actually researching this subject since 1984, and he's had the opportunity to visit many of Ellis's works to experience them firsthand. Tonight, he's going to present a wide array of Ellis's art, architecture, interiors, furniture design, graphic arts, and even designs for Gustav Stickley. Ellis's life and works will be placed in historical context and handled chronologically. As we know, each phase of our lives leaves a trace or an influence on the next succeeding portion. Ellis lived for beauty and to share that beauty. And with each change, a pattern of heightened design excellence and refinement occurred. Architectural staffs were influenced, as well as all those who read and studied the architectural journals of the day, and those who studied under Ellis in the various architectural sketch clubs that he established. So now, without giving away too much more of what John's actually going to say himself, please welcome John Guenther as he presents the forgotten architectural legacy of Harvey Ellis.
Thank you all very, very much for joining us in person, as well as all of you joining us remotely. We really appreciate your participating, and it's great to celebrate the life and works of Harvey Ellis. A sampling of his works are up here on the screen right now. And before we get much further, can we go ahead and darken the auditorium so that the slides are better seen? Thank you very much. So one of the things that we want to do tonight is to shed more light on this mysterious architect and to understand his contributions to architecture and his place in history, and to appreciate his collection of buildings across the country. Contributions to art and rendering, architectural design, the tall building, ornament, the jewel box bank, and arts and crafts. He's been described as a genius, an artist, an educator, a poet architect, journeyman architect, the cleverest designer of his day. He wrote, he was a very inventive ornamentalist, a graphic designer, furniture designer, and so on. And I think of him also as a comet who came from New York State, made his way through the Midwest, and then came back home to New York at the end of his life. And he's also the link between the great romantic H.H. Richardson and the masters of the Prairie School. So for context, it's important to understand his place in the architectural pantheon. He was born after Henry Hobson Richardson, and H.H. Richardson was looked up to by Harvey Ellis, and he admired his work greatly. He was somewhat of a contemporary of Louis Henry Sullivan, and then with CFA Voisin, Wright, and McIntosh following. So it's important to understand his place in history. He was born in 1852 in Rochester, New York, and he was the first son with three brothers following. And his father was a very prosperous hardware merchant who studied law as well. And at an early age, he showed a very artistic ability. The family home was at 7 Gibbs Street, and if you were to go to modern day Rochester, the red star lower left is the site of the home, very different these days. Here's an early sketch of young Harvey at age 9 or 11, a landscape with the cottage, trees, and people. So already showing some wonderful talent. By age 11, he's drawing the Admiralty building in London. And at age 13 or 14, he's sketching his father, who is reading a newspaper and I guess smoking a pipe behind that or something. But at any rate, he was a photograph of Harvey and Charles off to the right at age 12 or 13. Again, age 17, he's drawing architectural subjects here, this church in Kent and another church in Oxford. And here are figural drawings ready for the ride and a boy sitting in a chair. This is at ages 17 and 18. And here we are going for the mail, Henrietta, age 18, tromping through the deep snows of New York. At age 19, he received an appointment, I think through his father, to attend West Point, but it didn't necessarily agree with him. And he was dismissed shortly thereafter for a deficiency in French, was the official story. But this is a short list of some of the other issues that he had. Care of clothing unacceptable, cap on side of head, bore of gun was rusty, improper salute, didn't know the password, laughed in ranks and parade, throwing bread at supper, misspelled the words in the explanations of misconduct, and was delinquent 137 times in 5 months. So clearly he wanted to be an artist, not a soldier. So following his dismissal from West Point, he traveled throughout New York, Albany, Rochester, and New York City. He was actually a scenic theater painter and was a friend of the actress Sarah Bernhardt. And his father grew in stature in his political stature and was appointed deputy state treasurer, and he moved to Albany, New York in 1872. And then he was appointed as superintendent of banking in February of 73. And Harvey moved in with the family in 1875 before heading on to New York City. In New York City, he studied painting under Edwin White and of the National Academy of Design. And he also worked for an architect there in New York City and was a member of the Salmagundi Club dedicated to fellowship in art and the art of in learning better artwork. And then in 1876, Charles moves to Buffalo, his brother, to gain experience in architectural offices. And Harvey returns to Albany, New York in 1877, and there he meets H.H. Richardson, who was finishing up a project by another architect for the New York State Capitol building. And Ellis described Richardson as a magnificent big brute, but he was deeply influenced by Richardson and his massive Romanesque style. Here's a drawing of Ellis's father from 1879 by Harvey. And in it, you can see a little bit of despondency. He was actually removed from his post as state superintendent of banking. There was a politically motivated state senate trial, and so he had to leave that post. Thereafter, the family then returned to Rochester, And so this is just giving you a sample of the cities that Harvey and his family traveled to and from in these years. As I said, he was studying under the Dusseldorfian style of painting by Edwin White, and these are two paintings by Harvey Ellis from 1877 and 1878. And you can see the beautiful lighting that is captured in these paintings. He also taught, was a member of the Old Rochester Art Club. He was a founding member there, in fact, and would teach classes in painting and charcoal as well. So at some point he was suspended from the club and then never had anything to do with it again. Here's another series of drawings of Harvey Ellis, a young woman seated on the ground, 1879. This beautiful painting, Sea Breeze, Lake Ontario, and this luminous painting actually has one of he and his brother's architectural projects up on the hilltop, which is a Hotel Sea Breeze. It was a project. Man with a Scythe, you can feel the power of the oils being applied to that painting. And then a graphite painting, Plowing Early Morning in 1882, age 30. A sketch of In the Perch Season, Charlotte, New York. And the study of a farmer, charcoal and ink on paper. And a beautiful, very moody painting of the Somerville Pier and Lighthouse. You can feel the mist of the water. Pitching Hay, watercolor on paper, 1884. And at that point then, Charles, his brother, and he set up an architectural office, and they designed the Lyceum and Theater in Rochester, New York, 1879. This was published locally, and this was sort of the official announcement that they were in business as architects. Their offices were located in the Powers Building in Rochester, and this was developed by a very wealthy local banker, Daniel Powers. The top 3 floors were a home of his European art collection. They began with simple residential projects, this one for the Kendrick residence in Rochester. And then the Archer Building, which is a taller building in the mid-ground here, 1880. They manufactured dental and barber chairs. Here's another residence for the LaSalle, Frank LaSalle, and a current picture of that building. And then a Baptist church in 1880, Victorian Gothic. Another very impressive home for Henry Ellsworth, 1882, a very important work in the firm's first years. Color photograph of that building, which still stands. The Frank Smith residence, a prominent railroad lawyer. This is 1883. And then the Alexander Lamberton residence, beautiful triple bay. You can see the influence of the English style of architecture, Richard Norman Shaw. And this was in 1884. He happened to be officed in the Powers Building, was a real estate developer and superintendent of Rochester's parks. And today it is still standing as well. And then an important project came along, the United States Courthouse and Post Office. It's now the City Hall, but they received the commission to supervise the construction. Ellis couldn't hold off on preparing a design of his own. It no longer survives, but Mifflin Bell was the architect for this. So they were in charge of supervising the construction. Here's an aerial view of the building as it stands today. Sadly, in 1884, Eliza Ellis passes away, DeWitt's wife, on DeWitt's 56th birthday. She dies at the age of 52. This is a rendering by Harvey Ellis of a church project in Quebec. Along the same time, Charles Ellis, who was elected the school board member of the 10th Ward, was also indicted in 1885 for bribing a public official to accept his plans for a county jail, and was found guilty, and then stepped down from his position on the school board, as well as superintendent of the federal project that he was supervising construction for. At that point in time, Harvey Ellis is married, 1885, to a woman named Alice, that's all we know, and they head off to Europe for the grand tour of Europe and head off to France. And here you can see they visited the Chateau de Sénéchaux, which was 1515 to 1523. They visited it in 1885, and Ellis's signature is on the back side of this photograph. But you can see the influence of this building on Ellis's future work throughout. He also visited these other structures in France, and again, these massive, beautiful masonry structures with these curving towers and interlocking forms were quite influential for Ellis. He then returns to New York and moves to Utica, New York, and enters into a competition to memorialize General Ulysses S. Grant, who passed away July 23rd of 1885. And it's interesting to see this competition entry because you see the square tower with the interlocking cylinder of masonry, and that would become this key signature, if you will, of Ellis. He won the competition. It was not built, but he won the competition and became very famous for architects across the country. He became well known. And so he began his life as what is known as a journeyman draftsman. And there were a series of men who would travel from city to city, helping out in various architectural offices with various projects. But he was far more than a draftsman. He was a true art of building man, and when he was drawing and designing, he was designing buildings and illustrating buildings that could be beautifully built and detailed. He went to work first. He traveled to Minnesota, worked for Charles Mould, an architect there, and then Mould and McNichol. This is in St. Paul, Minnesota, and this is in 1886. This is the building where their offices were located. I've highlighted it in the upper right. That's where the offices were located along the Mississippi River there. And off to the left was Harvey Ellis's place of residence on 385 St. Peter Street. This is a very beautiful and very powerful residence that was designed by Harvey Ellis for Mould and McNichol. And you can see that signature cylindrical tower engaging into the corner with a very strong, powerful entry arch at the base of this composition. Here's a photograph of the building as realized. And to him, it represented the great opportunities of the West to design in great picturesque piles. So lots of materials at his disposal. So this is the John L. Merriam House, 1887. And then you can go back and see that competition entry, and you can see that Ellis signature right there. That stood near the state capitol building. This is the residence in context of the day. And it featured some beautiful wood carvings in the living area as well, to note the beautiful craftsmanship and ornament that he created. And the red star there represents where it would have stood today, where it's still standing across from the state capitol building in St. Paul. Then he also designed La Venière, the Detroit Museum of Fine Arts, and this was designed for J. Walter Stephens. So Stephens was in the same office building, and it's thought that he recruited Ellis to enter a competition to help him improve his chances for winning the competition. He also designed and rendered several residences for J. Walter Stephens. Another one here, so you can see the variety of styles. This is more of a shingle style building under a prominent roof. And yet another style of residence, also Ellis for Stephens. And then there's a large commercial building that was located on the riverbanks. And in point of fact, it was supposed to be twice as tall as what was realized. On the lower left, you can see the amount that was completed, but it was going to have about four or five more floors above that at one point. This is the location of that building site on the Mississippi River in downtown St. Paul. That building has been demolished since then, but here is a view of its more modern existence, and it was reclad in a more contemporary building skin, covering up all that detail that you just saw. So this superimposes what it would have looked like a few years ago. And the Bank of Minnesota project, also for J. Walter Stephens, and you can just feel that space. He really creates a great emotive feeling there. You can feel like you can walk in and conduct your banking from this rendering. He also designed the Goodsell Observatory at Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota, and this was a very highly technological building of its time. and it is listed on the National Historic Places in 1975. Again, you can see this is certainly the drum of the building is the observatory, so it's really engaging that masonry mass in an Ellis way. Here's early design drawings and an early photograph of the building. And at one point, it had a very state-of-the-art refractory 16.2-inch Brashear refractor, and a very expensive one, but very sophisticated. And actually, they were able, from this location, to set the time for St. Paul residents for their pocket watches. They would drop a ball down a pole in the St. Paul Fire and Marine Insurance Building, and they would set that at noontime. They could set their watches from the technology contained within this building. Here's a view of the observatory interior and exterior. And students, being as they will, when Star Wars was popular, they created an R2-D2 out of this building. Inside the observatory, you can see this amazing refractor that studied the stars and the patterns. And it was the sixth largest telescope at the time, 22 feet long and 27,000 pounds. Beautiful wood detailing on the stair handrails, as you can see, and the newel post. And it's located here on Carleton College in the upper right-hand corner. And at one point, it was on the cross-axes of the pedestrian paths there. He then moves to St. Paul to Minneapolis, I should say, and he works for Leroy Buffington. And he was an architect who practiced in the Boston block. That's the building that's illustrated right here. And he was a very noteworthy architect, advancing very modern hall buildings. The building, the Boston block, is where the current day library is, the upper left of the photograph. And Ellis was living at 910 3rd Street on 3rd Avenue South. And then later on moved a few blocks further west and a little closer to his place of work. He first assisted in the Fred Pillsbury residence of 1887, being designed by another architect in the office, but he helped illustrate the entrance to this proposed residence here, and you can see the rendering off to the left side here. Very impressive building. That residence would have stood at 303 South 10th Street, now very much an urban setting. And they also entered into the competition for the Minneapolis City Hall, Hennepin County Courthouse. And again, one imagines that they knew this competition was coming in, and Buffington recruits Ellis to come in and work on this competition. This is the proposal, the rendering that was submitted. And you can again see that French chateau influence with the tall tower with the turrets engaged on the sides of each corner. These are some of the study sketches which I had the privilege of seeing at the Northwest Architectural Archives at the University of Minnesota Libraries a few years back. And I want to point out that on one plan, there's a perspective, there's an elevation, and in the upper right-hand corner, he's got the program sketched out and how he sees it being distributed throughout the building. So again, he's way more than a renderer and a delineator. He is a true art of building man, and he was figuring out this building all the way along. These are some additional sketches of the competition here. And you can see the deep influence, again, of H.H. Richardson, who had just completed the Allegheny County building. So again, very much influenced by this Richardsonian Romanesque style. At the same time, then, Buffington was also proposing modern high-rise construction. He called it crazy construction. This happened to be a 50-story and 100-story cloud scrapers going back to 1882. He wanted to patent the skyscraper design concept and then charge every architect in America that followed. These are some early drawings of the design of the high-rise that were produced. And he received a patent application in 1887, and Ellis was present during that patent application approval. But as we know, the first tall steel building was done by William LeBaron Jenney in Chicago, 1885, the Home Insurance Building, which had a skeleton structure, and then an exterior skin. But these are some of the ideas that were sketched up for the high-rise building for Buffington, some of the ideas for the plans of that tower, and again, some of the details for the tower. And again, the idea of some decorative details as well that would be applied to some of the dormers at the very top. And here you see the 1887 patent as proposed and the rendering by Harvey Ellis of this 28-story skyscraper. Now this is 1888. And it is engaging these corner towers, chamfered tops at the very top that lead up to the pyramidal roof. But you can see the water tower design that he created in 1887, and again, his affinity for interlocking, curving structures, bartizans, if you will, that rise up the whole length of the tower, and that to this taller skyscraper. What was interesting is this drawing anticipated Louis Sullivan's Wainwright building. 1888 is this design, and the Wainwright is 1891 here in St. Louis. So he was in advance of Sullivan in his expression of the modern high-rise and the vertical expression. The 28-story skyscraper location, I was curious to think, where was that in downtown, in the city there? And so this is the skyscraper, this is the Boston block, was located where the library is. The West Hotel, which was designed by Buffington, was on that parking lot area. Then there is the Lumber Exchange building by Long and Keys. And then the high rise here would have been just a block away from the library of today. And so when I was up there on a trip, I photographed the site, and then I photoshopped it in just to see what it would look like were it built today. So very powerful piece of architecture, would have been interesting to see. Another design that was done near Minneapolis on the Mississippi River for Buffington was a soldier's home on a bluff. And this is one of the most exquisite renderings ever that Ellis did. Beautiful reflections in the water with the hilltop capped with this beautiful architecture. Again, the interlocking cylinder and square. And here is a plan of that building that would have been on the ridgetop, and a view from the parade grounds on the top of that site, and an early pencil sketch of that perspective, and then a more refined perspective, enlarged, and then the final perspective. And take note again of the reflectivity, and also take note of the person in that paddle boat there. He liked to put himself in his renderings. And so this is a sketch with Harvey Ellis paddling in the forefront of that design on the hilltop, just as he put himself into the sketch club rendering off to the left. This is the location of that site, just below Lock and Dam number 1 on the Mississippi River. Now then, following that, Pillsbury Hall, University of Minnesota, is one of the truly great works by Ellis, and one of the finest Richardsonian Romanesque buildings in the country. And obviously owes its deference to H.H. Richardson, but the composition is simply outstanding. And again, it features the interlocking cylinder and cube form. This was done for Leroy Buffington. This was the project before Harvey Ellis arrived in the office. That's what they were drawing up and pursuing, with this tall tower and this rather, I'll say, jumbled composition, if you will. So that's what could have arrived on that site, but Ellis transformed it into this. And so a beautiful composition under this large hip roof, twin arches leading up these monumental stairs. Again, the stair tower is expressed in the cylinder that engages with the main facade of the building with beautiful ornament. So going forward, this is how it appeared upon completion. A colored postcard gives you a better sense of that beautiful red tile roof. And here's a pure elevation drawing showing the geometry and the patterns that were detailed in this magnificent building. The floor plan is really interesting because of its efficiency. They have 2 very large classrooms at each end, and then a very short, if you will, very efficient circulation pattern, somewhat of a U shape in the very center, accessing double-loaded corridors to classrooms on either side. And with this close-up view, you can see the polychromy, the beautiful stonework, and this being a school for geology, the students were already getting a lesson before they even stepped foot inside the building. So beautiful decorative patterns. And the ornament is pure Ellis as well, that are engaged in interlocking with the facades again with the animal grotesque and the foliated ornament, the figures and the heraldic shields. These are all trademarks of Ellis. Here's a close-up of that animal grotesque and foliated ornament. Another view more recently of the building, and this magnificent arch that leads up, it's really quite stunning. You have arrived when you have walked up these steps here for sure. Since this time, it has been adaptively reused and renovated, and it's now the Department of English. So they have modified it so on-grade access is through the four archways directly ahead from a new plaza, as well as maintaining the two stairwells, exterior stairs and arches flanking the central plaza. So it's quite beautifully restored. A dormitory for the State Experimental Farm School at the University of Minnesota. And you can see here anticipating and following the English architecture of CFA Voisin. So again, very much in keeping with the times. An amusement park pavilion in Lake Minnetonka in Minnesota from 1887. The Spencer Library at William Penn College, 1888 in Iowa. And then the F.B. Hart residence in Minneapolis for Leroy Buffington. And some more illustrations of that Hart residence. And here's an enlargement of the interior rendering, complete with the dog that's napping at below the table, so and the tablecloth, the napkin draped over the edge of the table. So you are really invested in these, and you really feel like you could walk right into that image. And even in an oriel window with somebody looking out from the second floor. An interesting project, the Aragon apartment building in Chicago with these double round towers with conical roofs, and then an archway with a receding central entry. This is a project, but it shows up in St. Louis in an interesting location later on. This is 1888. Here's the A.G. Kennedy residence of 1888 in Minneapolis, and it is certainly deferential to the Williams E. Lowe residence by McKim, Mead, and White of 1886-87. So this was 1 year prior to that last design that you saw. One of the most striking, beautiful shingle-style buildings anywhere, sadly demolished in 1962. The Charles Pillsbury project near Minneapolis featured an urban setting that where the building wraps around and forms an outdoor courtyard, and very powerful building remains. And this is it has a reference to the Glessner House by H.H. Richardson, which preceded it. Another urban setting that has a hidden courtyard behind the street facades. Here's the S.C. Gale residence in Minneapolis as well. Again, this magnificent stone design, but it went through different iterations on its way to becoming the final product that you see there, just in the previous slide and here. And so you can see the stone tower actually rises up and forms the roof of stone in this, and quite a powerful tour de force project. So very magnificent. Worked at very large scales for these residences. This Gale residence would have been across from Loring Park. Also another competition for the Indiana Soldiers and Sailors Monument, with this more of an obelisk style of the design that sweeps up from its base, and a beautiful interior with cross vaults. Some additional pages from that competition, and you can see here the various ways to describe this for the judges. The Mabel Tainter Memorial of 1890, Menominee, Wisconsin, is another tour de force project by Harvey Ellis. And you notice there are 4 cylindrical corner towers that embrace the cubic volume of this and the hip roof of this performance hall. So at any rate, here is the superimposition of that rendering, and a rendering by Ellis of the project. And it features a very grand central arch as well. And again, you can just see the style of these corner turrets, and note how the recesses wrap around those conical roofs at the corner. That refers back to the John L. Miriam residence from earlier on. Here it is in reality, and a beautiful, very powerful stone building as one approaches. and this grand central arch leading into the main entrance. The tainter was in shipping logs in the river, a riverboat captain, and so this bow here is in stonework is to recall his life's work as a riverboat captain, delivering milled lumber on the Mississippi River. But take note of this amazing entrance with the decorative patterns surrounding the arch and the frame with the 1889 date on this. And note that the Chicago Stock Exchange building is 1893. So again, this arch predates Sullivan by 3 years. So you can see that he really was the link between Richardson and the Prairie School. And it also predated the Golden Door Transportation Building in the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893. The interiors of the Tainter Memorial are quite exquisite and very polychromatic. And it also features an amazing 1,597 pipe water-powered steer and Turner tracker organ in this building. But it's a Moorish design, quite elaborate. Another view of the stage and balcony and seating, lower level seating. And again, some other views of the interior. So a very sweeping view. This is at the corner of the building, one of the waiting rooms on the second floor. And again, stairwell and decorative patterns in the ceilings. And over time, it received an addition on the back side of the building for receiving, and you see it in the lighter buff stone on the back. So the geometry's been somewhat compromised, but still they tried to do something sympathetically. But what's interesting to me, what I see is this square base with these 4 round cylinders is the base of the 28-story skyscraper. You could just see the Mabel Tainter being extruded up 28 stories and relate back and forth. So you can see how Ellis's mind is working from one project to the next. Here is the Orff's offices in the Lumber Exchange Building, and he goes to work for the Orff brothers. And that's a location in downtown Minneapolis. Ellis is at 723 Nicollet Avenue, and then the Orffs are at 423 Hennepin Avenue. Here's one of the larger scale projects, residence that he designed for that firm. A mission chapel project also for the same firm. And a tenement for Henry James, and this was for the Orff brothers as well. So a wide range of styles. The Lindley project here, the residence of 1889. And then a Seaside Cottage, which was a competition perspective rendering from 1889. So a very beautifully composed, dramatic view looking upward. He also organized the Minnesota Architectural Sketch Club in late 1888, and this was one of the drawings that came out of that. But around this time, he moves to St. Joseph, Missouri in 1889, and it's thought because they knew that the St. Louis City Hall competition was coming up, and he was going to be attracted to work for and approached by Eckel and Mann in St. Joseph, Missouri. So this is an aerial view of St. Joseph, Missouri, and you can see the various locations of the offices and where Ellis lived. He set about designing the T.D. McNeely residence in 1889, and this building is a beautiful composition with these very dramatic arches in the solid masonry base with an octagonal tower this time, and a cylindrical tower as well, engaging. And they're similar to the John L. Merriam residence, as well as Pillsbury Hall, with its twin arch entries into the main building. This is a close-up view of that, and it's on a hillside overlooking St. Joseph. And here is, again, the Merriam residence, so you can see how these ideas, these stylistic references work from one project to the next. It is still standing, but not in the best of shape. This is a view that I took a number of years ago, and you can see the brickwork could use some restoration as well as the stonework. A view of the yard uphill. And interestingly, the porte cochere features a really interesting modern arch, if you will, and take note of the shape of this arch. And one is reminded of that same arch shape with Louis Kahn's Arch United Center of 1961 to 73. So note how the arch goes past the sides of those brick walls, just as Kahn does, and just as Robert Venturi does in the Guild House of 1960 to 63. So a very interesting sort of modern anticipation. Around the corner in St. Joseph, Ellis designed the McAllister residence. Its site was a corner. At first, they looked at it on a downhill slope of the corner and then moved it around the corner so that it was all level on this block of 105 North 19th Street. And again, pure Ellis, if you will. The stair tower in this curving form, a beautifully dramatic entry arch, and a conical tower rising up with an eyebrow window in the roof. That eyebrow window, by the way, was changed, as you can see in this photograph here. But a beautiful composition. And here you see it today in its warm red brick and stone textures. Detail shots, really an interesting archway that supports a wall and an opening that leads around the side of the building. But that arch just envelops one as you enter into the entry archway there. Nearby, the Josiah Beatty Moss residence is on a hilltop as well, and a very beautiful extravaganza of Ellis motifs. And it was based on all sorts of motifs that were found by the owners when they traveled in Europe with the Bay of Naples and the Doge Palace in Venice and so on and so forth. This is a view as constructed off to the right. And as you see it today, at the time I was there, it had been converted into a Mexican restaurant. But you can see here that the form is still a very powerful one. Beautiful polychrome brickwork in the tower and diaper patterns. There was a trellis on the upper right-hand side where there's a curving bay window on that terrace now. Used to be an open-air trellis. But really masterfully designed, and I love the way the copper finials engage that steeply pitched pyramidal roof as well. And you will see these features in our City Hall shortly. At this point in time, his father passes away in 1889, and his brother Frank also passes away 8 months prior. So this is a rather melancholy sketch by Ellis of just a somber thought before the shrine. He also designed a mausoleum, the Burns Mausoleum, at Mount Mora Cemetery in St. Joseph, Missouri. And this is a fascinating tour de force. Note that there's steps that come out towards the one who's approaching the mausoleum, and there's walls that come out and wrap around that elevated terrace, and there are seats there, benches for the visitors to wait and reflect outside before entering into the archway. And of note, George Simmons witnessed Harvey Ellis prepare this rendering while he was laying down on the floor, horizontal, with the drawing on the floor and sort of on his side, and just sketching away, just creating it from broadcloth on the tracing paper, all in one evening on the floor of his apartment. And just imagine, this is one of the most magnificent renderings, and to do it under those conditions, not at a formal drafting table or anything, but just casually. But so what's interesting is that this was a widely published design. It's 1889. The Wainwright Mausoleum is 1893, 4 years later. So you can see the similar motif of raised terrace and embracing arms with seats on either side. Again, Ellis's work was so published, I'm sure that it had an influence here on the Wainwright, albeit an entirely different architectural style. He also influenced the American National Bank building design, so this was Ellis working with the partners there. And some close-up details with the heraldic shields above the very powerful arched entryway. And here you see, again, the beautiful brickwork and arches. And a little drinking fountain embedded into the side adjacent to the entrance. The SM Nave residence was a preliminary design of an unrealized project, but a very powerful residence in St. Joseph. And here's another side view of that Nave residence. Another unnamed residence of the 1889 in St. Joseph. And the Central Police Station of 1890, which was built with some modifications. And here you see it of today. That leads us to St. Louis. There's St. Louis City Hall competition. In 1889, Eckel and Mann enter and they win the competition. And it's designed in the French style for the French city of St. Louis. And so this was the entrance elevation that was submitted. And it was based upon the Hotel de Ville in Paris, their city hall. And so they were drawing upon this for inspiration. This is a perspective view of St. Louis City Hall of the submission from Eckel and Mann. And you can see somewhat of a loose composition, if you will, but it has those French elements. And here's the floor plan of the competition with 4 light wells surrounding this cruciform circulation plan. As it was evolved, the floor plan evolved into this design, which obviously you know today, but it transformed from that earlier design. So what Ellis did was when they won the competition and they moved to St. Louis, he and George R. Mann, they revised the design of the building. So Ellis transformed from this perspective to this composition. And I'll do that one more time. So you can see the original intention and then the much more sure-handed version that was designed by Ellis. And I find it interesting too when you look at the individual elements and you think about the St. Joseph projects that we just saw, the Beatty residence there, Beatty Moss residence. Look at the turrets, look at the towers, and you can see the steeply pitched pyramidal roofs with the finials at the top. You can see those finials above the dormers. So there were elements in that residence that find their way into this composition. Another view of of City Hall of the day with that grand tower, which sadly no longer is part of the composition. And today you can see it without that tower. Postcard that shows the building of its time, and as you see it today. And that grand clock on the top that just floats in front of the facade, a pure Ellis move as well. And one thing that's of note, you know how he started these sketch clubs? Well, he was a founding member of the St. Louis Architectural Club. This was a club that got together and taught young architects about architecture. And these are the founding members of that club: Oscar Enders, J. Willard Adams, Harvey Ellis, and William B. Ittner. And their firms were Isaac Taylor, Theodore Link, Eckel and Mann, and Eames and Young. The interesting part about this, the club was formed at the construction site, the offices for the architects, and those offices were located in the middle of the street here, so on 12th Street here. So it's fascinating just to think of the history that has happened that we drive past and perhaps over these days, but that's where the club was formed. And then the Mabel Tainter Memorial, which we've already seen, this is 1891. So he's in St. Louis working here, but he then goes back and helps out Leroy Buffington with this design. He also helps and produces designs for Buffington for the library project at the university. The Nicholson Hall project he designs for Buffington, 1890-91, and some renderings of Nicholson Hall and some other viewpoints, and as built. And here it is as built today. And the Security Bank of Minneapolis for Buffington, 1891. And this is the Jewel Box Bank, and a very important development in the history of architecture. And you can see this is where you can walk in now, not go up a set of monumental steps and conduct your banking. What's interesting to note is that it has that very powerful entry arch with the ornament embedded as a frieze on the building in the central dome over the banking hall. And you can see these elements again if you look back to his residential projects here, looking at the McAllister House with its very powerful arched entry. It's almost a repeat of that. What's interesting also, Louis Sullivan was the one who was noted for jewel box banks, but this again predates Louis Sullivan by quite a bit. And William Gray Purcell, who worked in Louis Sullivan's office, said that when he was in Sullivan's office in 1903, this sketch of this Ellis building was pinned up beside George Elmsley's drafting table. So we know for sure that the impact of Harvey Ellis on Louis Sullivan was very real. And it predates Frank Lloyd Wright's monolithic concrete bank of 1894, so predates it by a year. So he's out in front of these modern masters. and it's predating the National Farmers Bank of 1906-08. While Ellis was here, he lived at 1116 Locust Street. He also lived in a hotel across from City Hall. As I mentioned, the club was formed, the architectural club was formed on 12th Street in Tucker there. And he also submitted a competition for the St. Louis Union Station project. This was his competition entrance, which placed the entry in the tower to the west, away from the corner. It did not win, but a very powerful design. This was the winning entry by Theodore Link. And a very powerful waiting room, beautifully ornamented and integral lighting of the time with torchieres integrated in the figures that are holding the lights around the grand arch there. And a close-up view of that same space. By the way, I would note that Edwin Cameron was Link's partner. He was the construction supervisor for the New York State Capitol building when Ellis was there in Albany. So again, that H.H. Richardson connection exists here as well. But it's also interesting to see the design of this space with the Indiana Soldiers and Sailors Monument as well. So there's an interesting cross-reference here. People have asked if Ellis had a secret hand in the Union Station. I do not believe so, but I believe he had an influence by the architects he taught and mentored here in St. Louis, and that translated into this building. But a very magnificent Union Station building nevertheless here, and the gateway to our city back in the late 1800s. The Aragon apartment, which I showed you earlier from Chicago, and a private club, Twin Circular Towers, find their way into a building here in St. Louis. At the time, it was the Insane Asylum for the Sisters of St. Vincent de Paul, and it was designed in 1891 by Ellis for George R. Mann, and it's at 1600 Castle Park Drive. It's just a little south and east of UMSL's campus. But here you see this really powerful design, and it's one of his very few symmetrical, maybe his only symmetrical design, if you will. He believed in asymmetry, not symmetry. But here's a view of the approach, and also done in more of a Southwest Spanish style as well, just to check out that imagery. But what settled upon was again, the French chateau style of architecture, an aerial view of this building. And you see it is very, very symmetrical in all its aspects. It was based upon the Kirkbride plan of 1848 to 1890. And I want to give credit to Peter Wallenberg, who did a tremendous research on this design of this kind of planning for the asylums, and he gave a wonderful presentation a while ago. But you can see the symmetrical plans that have shortened hallways, double-loaded hallways, that stair step in plan, and this allowed them to place the patients in either on grade, further away from the central administration offices, or higher up and closer to the administration. So depending upon your illness, that was where you would reside in this lengthy building. But here you see the chateau-esque elements here as one approaches. The twin towers, and as you walk up and you see the series of arches leading upward. And interestingly, if you note at the very top there is a symbol, and it's used actually by the craftsman, all it can, to the best of my ability. And that's embedded into the facade, and this is 1894, and this is about 10 years prior to him working with the Craftsman magazine and Stickley. So here you see the beautiful brickwork and the detailing and just the simple brick textures that animate the facades. And just the push and pull of the brick facades, just a few inches in and out, really beautifully scale the building to create a wonderful pattern on the form of the building. And a view of that that stair tower that flanks. And it reminds one of Ellis's tour of Europe when he visited Piazza San Marco, the Campanile. So you can see that referencing back from the Grand Tour. This is a favorite detail of mine on the building, this arched window with a field of patterned brick that surrounds it. Because what I see here is the Mabel Tainter archway from 1888 to 1890. Just a year or two later is translated into a very modern, minimalist, reduced version simply done with brick and pattern brick to create an arch with a rectangular frame surrounding that archway. Sadly, in 2020, you may recall June 11th, it caught fire. And they were successful in limiting the damage of the fire to the back side there. But that was, we all held our breath that day. And so, some views from that. But today, it's Castle Park Apartments. It was renovated by Dick Henry and Associates in 1980 for affordable housing. Another view of Palmer College, 1891. This is northeast of St. Joseph, Missouri, far Eckel and Mann in Albany. So just a little bit northeast of St. Joseph, Missouri. Sadly demolished in 1940s. And then in St. Louis, he's also designing various projects. The Mercantile Club of 1891. Here's a view of the entrance on horseback and the interiors. And some more interiors of the club. This was a competition that was not won. And then the Columbia Club with its beautiful Italian composition and outdoor space. And the details of that exterior. And some more details, dining outside. And then the TPA, the Traveler Protective Association building, 1892, unrealized. The Merrimack building, a tall building of 1892 as well, for George R. Mann. And then the Edward Martin building of 1892. This building actually was realized, and it stood at the corner of 10th Street and Washington Avenue. And a beautifully composed office building alongside the street, and sadly demolished again in 1968. We needed to treasure these more, and this came down, and it became a parking lot alongside the Lambert building. But I was curious to see what it would look like if we could rebuild it, and here it is. So you can see the composition is a beautiful block of buildings that each have cornice lines and belt courses that relate one to the other. The Fraternal Building, 1892. Now he's working with a firm called Randall, Ellis & Baker, so he's actually yet working with another firm that he's a partner with. And then some residences for Frederick Fout, some Randall Terrace, Garrison and Lucas Avenues, Frederick Smith residence, a design for a residence in St. Louis, 1892, interiors for another residence, and the Dr. Max Starkloff residence of 1892. This has actually been rebuilt from the terrible tornado that came through, but that was anyway, 1896 it came through and kind of destroyed the corner turret, but it's been rebuilt. But Dr. Max Starkloff, it's interesting to note, was an American physician. He was a health commissioner in St. Louis, and during the influenza pandemic of 1918, he issued an edict that closing public venues and prohibiting gatherings of more than 20 people in October 1918. So he was credited with social distancing with that pandemic ahead of his time. Here's a view of the residence today. This is just southeast of Compton Hill Water Tower, and another apartment building garage behind. Baptist Church in Montgomery City, and a great entrance to a park here, which obviously owes its reference to H.H. Richardson and the Ames Gate. Another entrance to a private street of 1892, Fout Place, and some other versions of entrances to private streets. And of course, the entrance here for Bell Place Realty. And again, this tower with a winged statue on top to Bell Place. And you recall that at the Soldiers Memorial up in Minneapolis above the Mississippi River. But here's the entrance to Washington Terrace of 1893. This is what it looked like. That building was built first to entice potential home buyers. So that told you were going to purchase and buy into a very special neighborhood. It was, Carolyn Hughes Toft has remarked that it has reminiscences and reflections of the 15th century portal at Lübeck, Germany. It also has a very direct relationship to the Grosse Cloche Bordeaux, the Big Bell, 15th century municipal clock tower in France. And you can see from the red line up how similar it is to the design here in St. Louis. But here are a couple of views of this entry gate from the time, and an article from 1893 from the Post-Dispatch, which had his name on the rendering, proving that he did design this building. covered in ivy from a postcard, and then cleaned up. Beautiful brickwork and terracotta work and tile roof. And again, I'll just show you some, you can just see the influences of the buildings he designed and he saw on his grand European trip. Again, that clock tower is just floating above and out in front of the conical, of the pyramidal roofs, just like our city hall. And the Winkle Terracotta Company provided the terracotta for this, just as they did with the Wainwright building. One of his masterpieces, the Compton Hill Water Tower, 1893 to 98. He designed it in 1893, left St. Louis, and it wasn't completed till 1898. But it's a water tower with a 5-foot diameter standpipe that absorbs surges from the city water system when the pumps kick on in the Mississippi River. And so there are 3 water towers that we have here, and really the most existing in the nation. So the Compton Hill Water Tower, Grand Avenue Water Tower, and Bissell Street. And here are some drawings of 2 of these towers. And inside you see I've colored the blue, those are the surge pipes, those are the standpipes that allow the water to rise up and reduce the pressure so that it did not destroy the residential piping systems in the neighborhoods with the great surges that came through the water system. Another view here, and you can see the tower under construction under the scaffolding here. And here you see the bartizans. There's 4 of these cylindrical bartizans, 1 on each corner, and the 4th rises all the way up to form a conical roof out of stone. And this is 179 feet in height and beautifully composed with masonry, with stone and brick patterning, with a stair-step pattern, and a wonderful masonry base there. And I would point out, notice how the top of the water tower here is chamfered. Notice how he chamfered the top of the 28-story high-rise in Minneapolis earlier. So again, this idea is ideas are carried from one project to the other. A view looking up at the beautiful ornamental base and the pinwheel plans, if you will, of the various stairs as they cascade down. And here you see the water symbolized that's pouring out of the stonework represented in the stone carving. Beautiful detail. And a restoration with replicated lights that have been added recently, beautifully done. And over the entrance to the arch leading into the tower. And one thing I would note too, that it's more than just architecture and infrastructure. It's a urban planning. This is placed on the center line of Shaw Boulevard. And not the entire building on the center line, but the bartizan itself in the northwest corner is on the center line of the street. So it's architecture and urban design. And it proves beautifully Ellis's adage, not symmetry, but balance. So it could have been very symmetrical, but he purposely does not make it that way. What is amazing is what you've witnessed here is a span of 8 years, okay? From the entrance, the competition that he won for a grant, to the water tower. So a very prolific architect. He continued to produce residences here. This is a design for Jar Jar Man himself. Here's a bowling alley and club, very Wrightian and Prairie School. Here's a church for St. Edward, unrealized. And then at this point in time, the classicism rises and the Chicago World Columbian Exposition happens, and he gives up on architecture and returns home to his home of Rochester, New York, to be with friends and family and to return to his art, living in various locations around the city and producing really amazing artwork here. And this is one of his beautiful paintings, Our Lady of Notre Dame. The Evening Gun, this is 1894. The Cows in a Hazy Landscape. Urban site, moonlight scene. Mending the Nets. By the Sea. Joan of Arc. And Ellis did convert to Roman Catholicism at some point after his return to Rochester. Here's a beautiful old mill in stages of decay. Burning brush, clearing the landscape here. Fishermen at the canal lock. Canal scene at night. So very, emotive and ethereal drawings, very environmental drawings. Pallas Athena leading the ships of the Argonauts. And this is a fascinating painting, Sandy Bay. Notice how flattened it is. And it predates C.R. Mackintosh, Charles Rennie Mackintosh, 1926. This is going back to 1898, so it's predating it by 28 years. So again, really amazing forward-thinking artist. Now, one of his styles of painting was called an acrostic, where he does compositions in 3 layers. So it's the line composition, it's notan, it's light and dark composition, and then he adds color. And so we'll go through this, the silhouettes of the boats. So here it is as a line composition. Then as you apply notan, light and dark, it transforms into this. And then you add color, and it transforms into this. So he operates on this Trinitarian approach to artwork in this acrostic design of his artwork. The hourglass of 1898. Here's a study. You can feel the energy of that locomotive coming into the station. The port scene, the industry of the Northeast. Angel appearing to the shepherds. Lady in Shallot of Shallot. To these belong the world in the future, an homage to craftsmen. Beautiful artwork in a billiard room at a house in Rochester. And then graphic design. He got into graphic designs for various publications. And you can see these covers. Here's for Harper's Magazine. And then an invitation for a dinner honoring a general in the Army. Illustrated, another illustration. And for poetry as well. And while there, they initiated a club called the Vagabonds, a group of men who liked to have lunch every day, and they would meet in the back of a bookstore that was owned by one of them, George Humphrey, and just a social club and sharing life together. He also formed his partnership with his brother, again Charles, in architecture. Here's a home in Iowa that they designed. Here's the Woodworth Building in Rochester, which was realized. This is 1894. Here's an addition to a factory building, which was realized in 1899. And entries to a residential place. And a section through a library and conservatory for the Cunningham residents. And another house project. And here's another plaster house project here. And this is around 1901 or so. In 1902, Charles decides to retire from the practice and moves to the suburbs of Rochester, leaving the office to Ellis. It's at that time that Gustav Stickley comes into Ellis's life. And as we know, Stickley, a very influential furniture manufacturer and book and magazine publisher, and creating a whole environment for lifestyles in his day, de facto leader of the arts and crafts movement in America. Well, it turns out that he had mounted an exhibition in the Craftsman Building in Syracuse, New York in 1903, in March and April. And he showcased his very solid, very massive hand-built oak furniture, which you can see here. And Ellis took on the assignment of taking that exhibition and mounting it in April of 1903 in the Eastman Building in Rochester, New York. And Stickley really appreciated how he mounted that exhibition and asked him to come to work for him at the Craftsman magazine. And so he moves to Syracuse, New York, and begins to have his very profound influence on Stickley. Here is modern-day Syracuse. The Craftsman Building is the upper right-hand corner. That was the location Ellis was living at 514 Montgomery Street. But you can see immediately how he lightened the effect of the furniture, much, much lighter than what Stickley had been producing, with beautiful inlays. The side chairs were quite stunning in their artistry. And here are a variety of those chairs. And you can compare it to the Eastwood chair up in the upper left, the very, very ponderous design. He also created these bookcases for Stickley. And here you see a fall front desk, a writing desk, and an inlaid piano. And then he started to illustrate what it would look like for these to be in a completely designed interior. so that the future homebuyers could understand what the effect was, the total lifestyle of craftsmanship. And so then he even designed houses, and this was part of the Craftsman magazine publications as well. And in color, so you could see the color scheme and total art surrounding you. And here's an urban house that features actually a carport and a courtyard. So there's a courtyard in back, and there's an ingle nook at the fireplace, of course, and then an auto parking space in anticipation of automobile age. So here's the courtyard in the back. And there is a view into the living room area, the piano, the ingle nook at the fireplace. And then he also designed a bungalow for the Craftsman magazine. This is 1903, and it had a windmill for additional power and for pumping water. And it actually got built in 1905 by John Bryan, CEO of Sara Lee. So I'm glad, and I got to visit this a few years ago as well. It's quite beautiful to see the grounds here at Crabtree Farm. These are the interiors of that building, completely filled up with Harvey Ellis designed furniture. And he also decorated the interiors, and he created these wall hangings with cartoons. And this, in case, is the Puss in Boots cartoon wall hanging in fabric. And he loved that kind of fantasy world and to draw cartoons as well as decorate them in his houses. And so this is the children's room, elevation on the right-hand side, and a detail of that. And here it is in reality. So you can see how it's hanging from the wall where it meets the ceiling, and it even wraps around the head of the door. So with the cat perched on the top of the door frame looking over. So a sense of humor as well. Beautiful furniture is still available by Stickley as well, so you can still purchase these pieces. The bookcases, the chairs, and so on, writing desk. Sadly, Harvey Ellis passed on January 2nd of 1904. So he's just 52 years of age. He died of nephritis, and it was really a tragic loss. And he was eulogized, and the Western architect wrote that Harvey Ellis came just short of influencing Western work more strongly than that of any other designer before or since his time. William Gray Purcell said, "Before you see a very great architect who stands on his own feet." William Gray Purcell also said he was known by anybody who read a magazine from the 1880s to well past the 1900s. A true art of building man, a master of composition, approaching Richardson in the quality of his work. And Hugh Garden also said the expression of beauty was a constant need and creation the simplest of tasks for Harvey Ellis. He was buried in an unmarked grave in Syracuse in 1904, but in 1997 they located the grave and they placed a proper marker there, a gravestone marker, and Kevin Curtis, a friend of mine from Stickley, actually attended the service and sprinkled shavings from the wood shavings from the factory, from the Stickley factory, at the dedication of the headstone. This is the location of that cemetery. So very quickly, I'm going to just in summary show you again what you've seen tonight. Here's Harvey Ellis's work, 1877, 1884, as an artist. Here's his work with his brother in Rochester, New York, at two periods of his life. Here is his work with Malden McNichol on the left and J. Walter Stevens on the right. His work for Leroy Buffington, masterful projects. Ekelyn Mann in St. Joseph, Missouri. George R. Mann and Ekelyn Mann here in St. Louis. We have much to be grateful for. And additional projects with George R. Mann here in St. Louis. And additional projects with George R. Mann, very prolific. And then with Randall Ellis and Baker, 1892. And his various roles as educators in New York, in the Rochester Art Club, the Minnesota Architectural Sketch Club, the St. Louis Architectural Club. So he was always involved with educating the younger architects. And here he is as an artist from 1894 to 1901. These are some of his works here. And here he is as a graphic artist, 1894 to 1901. And work for the arts and crafts. This was a mere 7 months or so with Stickley in designing furniture, residences, illustrating them, writing for the magazine. The world is truly richer for his vision, as Jean R. France noted. And with that, I thank you. Yes, it was, I don't think so. I'm not, I have to do more research on it, yeah. It was a church, yeah.
John, another question.
Yes,
I read that Ellis always signed his work.
Yes.
Is that true as far as you know?
yes, he did.
Including his graphic artwork and so forth?
I'd have to go back and check that out. With the graphic arts, with the publications, that was probably a little harder to do for the magazines and what have you, but, yeah.
Did he work in stone or was it primarily in brick?
A lot of, really, he did stone, brick, and wood. So he was, you know, you saw the stone carvings of these buildings across time, just masterful ornamental design. So he really was a master of all these different materials. Yes?
Was Buffington an architect or a contractor? Or
Buffington was an architect, yes.
what kind of training did it take? At that time, you didn't go to architecture school.
Right. I would have to go back and look up his credentials. He did work for with another architect prior to coming to Minnesota, and to the location there. Interestingly enough, yes, you're right. I mean, there was apprenticeships going on at that time, as well as these architectural clubs, these sketch clubs, and training sort of a bit more informal. There is the École des Beaux-Arts, if you could afford and get accepted to Paris to study there. But the training was really in its infancy, if you will, with more of an architectural sketch clubs and clubs themselves. What's interesting to note, with Buffington and others, with Ellis coming into town, so to speak, and designing these buildings, he didn't always get the credit he deserved. You know, the name on the door dominated these projects. But that's one of the reasons why I like to talk about Ellis, is to give him his due credit at this point in time. Because a lot of times he was sort of shortchanged. Yes. Yes.
What was the reason that he never did have his name on a firm?
You know, he.
Well recognized during his lifetime.
Right.
Why was it that he didn't have a firm of Ellis?
Right. Well, you know, he was in partnership with his brother, but that had a short, that came to a quick end at the first time around and the second time. I don't think he was business minded. He was more of the artist and the creator and the design side of things. So I think he was happy to, just be left to create these beautiful images and design these buildings, and let the architects of record, if you will, take on those other responsibilities. So then he would be recruited, if you will, from one city to the next, as those offices knew there was a big competition coming up. Yes, Bill.
Do you have a sense of how long he would stay on a particular project, particular architect?
Well, let me just put it this way. All the architectural work that I showed you, from the time he won the competition to the Compton Water Tower, was 8 years. And so, these stays at these various offices sometimes would be a matter of, months, maybe a half a year, maybe a year, some for a couple of years. And then he would go back. He would be called back, as I mentioned, to go back up to Minnesota with the jewel box bank design, even while he was here in St. Louis. So he was sort of, as I say, this comet, just kind of circling around the Midwest, creating this beautiful artwork. But I think he was more in love with the art of architecture, and not so much the business of architecture. Yes. Rob? Sorry.
Where was Ellis when all this was going on?
There's not a lot known about Ellis, but there were some stories, and I didn't really have time to get into it tonight, but there were some stories about the marriage, and she was in St. Louis for a period of time. They did have a son. It was a case where Ellis had, she departed from St. Louis and left the son with a caretaker, and it was not the best of situations. So it was kind of a peripatetic life, and you can imagine Harvey was probably at the office from sunrise, sunset. So not the best in terms of the family situation. I'll just leave it at that. Yeah. In the back?
John, that Mexican restaurant that used to be a residence in
Yes.
St. Joseph,
Yeah.
is that in good enough shape to go visit?
I believe so. I will tell you, they did go through a restoration project a few years after I was up there, and they were, I think, going to put up an asphalt shingle roof instead of the slate tile roof that they had, and I wrote a letter opposing it, and they were not too happy with me. But I had to speak my mind. But I would say I would go up there and see it for sure. It may not have all like I said, the roof might have been changed, but it's definitely worth seeing. And there's many other projects in St. Joseph to see. Yeah.
Now, how long you said it was Stickley, only about 6 months?
From May of 1903, and he passed away January of 1904.
I swear I saw something on, Channel 9's, function. But anyways, somebody found a music cabinet.
Mhm.
By Stickley that Harvey Ellis designed.
Yeah.
And it was just a music cabinet, and it went for over 50 to 60,000.
Yeah. They're very, very prized.
The house was that they bought it.
Right. Very prized. Yes. Esley?
You were talking about why he didn't establish his own practice. Jean France said she thought it was because of the stigma that his brother had brought on him by getting arrested for bribery.
Bribery, well, that could have been as well. Yeah, it could very well have been. Thank you for sharing that. Yes. Okay, we'll do one more, then I think we have to draw closure. Yes.
Is there any relationship between the Pillsburys and some of these earlier projects and the Pillsbury name I see around town here in St. Louis?
Yeah, I mean, it's the Pillsbury company that originating up there in Minneapolis. So, yeah. So he managed to work on a couple of the residences for him. Yeah. Mhm.
It's a different family. Like Mary, yeah. I forget what their business was, but their father, those two women's father had his own business.
Okay. Thank you for correcting me. Thank you. Okay. All right. Well, with that, we thank you very much for joining us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you next year when we have our 2025 series, and we will announce that as soon as we can, okay? So thank you all.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Drive safe, everyone. Good night.
Hi, Ashley.
I was looking at the clock, I was like, I gotta speed things up here.
You were just plowing through it, but I